Hi everyone, I hope you're having a great Saturday. Stepan here. We are going to have a look at the Ponziani opening today, an opening that has been mostly neglected on my channel due to its rarity and me, not playing it. Against e5, I would always play the Italian. So today we are looking at the move c3 on move 3. After knight c6, there are many things white could do. The most probable openings you're going to face if you play e5 are the Italian, the Spanish, the Scotch, and maybe knight c3. But the Ponziani with c3 is a fairly interesting attempt from white to steer the game in an interesting direction, which is going to be fairly uncommon compared to the main lines. Now, the Ponziani has been described as a bad opening mostly by chess authors and people who devote time to chess openings. Frank Marshall wrote that there is no point in white's third move unless black plays badly. White practically surrenders the privilege of the first move. Graham Burgess called the Ponziani a relic from the bygone age. And Bruce Pandolfini, who is a relatively recent chess author, and he teaches chess openings, said that it leads to interesting play and deserves to be played more often, but it has basically never been played on the top level. There's a game by David Howell played recently. Every now and then a top GM is going to play this as a surprise weapon, but realistically the Ponziani doesn't give you the play that you normally get from the Spanish and the Italian. The entire Ponziani repertoire and everything you're going to see is available on my Patreon page in the shop. You can get it for just $3 US a month, as well as numerous other openings. You can get the French, the Spanish, the D4 repertoire, London repertoire, Sicilian Caro-Kann E4, all of that stuff. You can buy them separately, or you can choose to support the channel, join my Patreon page for just $3 US a month, and gain access to all of these, as well as 500 other posts. If you want an easy way to learn the Ponziani and every other opening, I use Chessbook. I also use it for tournament prep, and basically when I see what my opponent plays, I'm going to import a study from lichess based on my prep and drill it out on Chessbook. That being said, Chessbook can be used for much more than that. Firstly, I've imported the Ponziani here, the repertoire you can find below. You enter the Ponziani, you can continue learning every move that's due for review, recommended moves, or the entire repertoire. That's the easiest part. It's spaced repetition, and you can choose to get hints or not get hints. But what I like more about this repertoire is plans and model games. So once you get into the Ponziani, so e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, c3, at any point you can select to see plans from here and model games from here. So Chessbook is going to help you by allowing you to study what's actually important. So it chooses a game in which the side that you're trying to prepare for is, better. And that way you can play the next move. If you make a mistake, Chessbook is going to tell you what really happened in the game and so on. So Chessbook is a great way to learn openings. What I normally do, once again, is I prepare my repertoire and do it with a lichess study, export the study, import it into Chessbook, and that just makes things, very easy. So follow the link in the description. Let's go back to the Ponziani. So what's the point? When you play c3, you're preparing to play d4. It's as simple as that. You want to go d4, you want to build a broad center, but let's do some comparison first. In the normal Italian, when you play c3 and d4, so let's say you start with bishop c4, black plays bishop c5, and then we go for the same thing, we go c3. Now when we play d4, there's a tempo on the bishop on c5. That's not the case in the Ponziani. So we aren't gaining this tempo. Moreover, we are taking away the main square for the b1 knight, and the b1 knight is the only piece that can relatively comfortably defend the pawn on e4 without having to play weird moves like bishop d3 or queen e2. So it's no great surprise that black's main response to the Ponziani is the move knight f6, simply attacking the pawn on e4. Now that's considered the main line. It's called the Jaenisch Counterattack. and it's by far the best move. The engine gives it as slightly better for black with very precise play. So white wants to go d4. White's not going to gain a tempo on the bishop unless, you know, if you look at the database on lichess, people play the move bishop c5 all the time. This is just a blunder. Why would you go into a bad position where white just goes d4 with tempo? This is obviously much better for white. On a high level, it's winning for white because white has this very natural development. White has a ton of central space, and the only way for black to counter that center is to play d5. But let's say knight f6, white can now go d5. If black had gone d5, white, you know, can do whatever they want. They can advance with e5, they can play e takes d5, for example, e d5, queen d5, I don't know, bishop e2 preparing to castle, and you're going to have to lose another tempo moving that queen. So when white plays c3, black should be careful, and black has two ways to fight against this idea. One way is to, as we pointed out, play knight f6 and put pressure on e4 straight away. The other one is to play d5, and I think this is a very promising variation. Wherever white plays something slow, as Marshall wrote, handing the first move to black, then black playing d5 usually, as is the case in the Italian and in the Spanish and in almost every king's pawn, e4, e5, double king's pawn opening, d5 is a good idea. Now, there are alternatives to these two moves. I would say that the two inferior moves are d6 and f5. d6 will just lead to either a Pirc/modern type of position if, you know, black plays d6 and g6 and bishop g7, or an old Indian type of position if they go d6 and bishop e7. Those are pretty equal. White should stand slightly better. White will usually play d4, d5, advance that pawn further. And if black plays f5, which online is, no surprise, the most popular variation, the Ponziani Countergambit, then white is simply better. Now, the name Ponziani actually comes from a 19th century Italian player, and it's got the entire opening got its name because of this counterattack. It's called the Ponziani Countergambit, and that's why today we call the opening the Ponziani. So, what can you expect? You can expect positions that are A, very tame, similar to the gioco piano, but you don't have your bishop on c4. Or you can expect wild positions when black knows what they're doing with massive complications, and it's either going to be equal or slightly better for black. That being said, on my level, on club player level, on online, and anything below serious grandmaster level, it's definitely a viable opening and a great surprise weapon. I think one of the best things about the Ponziani is that people will not expect it. So let's go into the main lines. This is what you're going to see 90% of the time. Okay, so what do? We're not going to defend that pawn. We're going to counterattack on e5 and blast through the center, so d4. Now, black has several options here. By far, the most common move, both in master play and online, is knight takes e4. If you attack that pawn, you're going to take that pawn. But we're going to have a look at the sidelines first. Firstly, let's look at ed4. ed4, in my opinion, is not a great move, even though it should be equal according to the engine. It allows white exactly what they are trying to do. White now plays e5. The knight can either go to e4 or to d5. So let's say knight d5, c takes d4. And again, white has built this broad center. It's easy to undermine it with d6, and it's likely going to collapse, but still. For example, bishop b4 check. Bishop d2. The reason you play bishop d2 is so that you can have a knight on c3. You don't want to go knight c3 now, because that would, you know, lose material. So bishop d2, and after bishop d2, once again, we take with the queen because we want to go knight c3. It's playable to take with the knight, but after queen takes d2, d6, knight c3 is the most natural square for the knight, and we attack the knight on d5, forcing basically takes and c takes. However, after d5, you can see that our center is basically gone. We can still get away with moves like bishop b5 and we play tactically, but, you know, it's nothing major. It should be about equal. And after black, let's say, castles, and white takes on e5, we exchange queens. It's a relatively normal position. So this is the type of downside you can get from the Ponziani. You get a liquidated position with mass exchanges where white's going to end up with, you could say, a weak pawn on c3. So that's one option. Still, knight e4 I think is optimal for black. We're going to have a look at the main line in a second. If ed4, e5, and not knight d5 but knight e4, I think this is fine for white. We simply go queen e2. Black needs to defend the knight. There's only one way. f5, and now ef6 and d5. Black keeps defending the knight. I think this is a bit too complicated for black to handle. Even though people who play this are going to know a bunch of theory, it's still a very messy position. For example, knight bd2, queen f6, knight e4, d4, queen e4 check. It's supposed to be fine, but I don't know. I would rather have white here. We are up a pawn, and we aren't going to be able to keep that pawn, as you're going to see. Now, once again, in the repertoire, you can find below, this line goes 20 moves deep. But after something like knight d4, queen d4, queen d4, c d4, this pawn is going to be tough to defend. For example, bishop e6, bishop e3, and you can see that bishop f6 and castle's queenside is coming. We don't have an easy rook d1 due to the a2 pawn hanging, and so on and so forth. So if you go d4 and black wants an easy draw, in my opinion, playing ed and knight e4 is the way to achieve that. Black is never going to be better, but it should be a relatively simple draw. There are pigeons walking on the balcony, and they look like they're playing some sort of game or fighting. I wish I had a better camera. I would record this for you. That's crazy. Now there are 3 of them. Okay, sorry about that. So on d4, knight e4 or ed4 are the best moves. There are 2 other moves. One of them is d6, and as I said, this is usually slightly passive, and this exact position is going to transpose to the modern with c3 and knight f3. So after bishop d3, g6, we are now in the modern defense, and this is a relatively standard opening where, you know, I had this with white. I like having a pawn on c3 to defend my center, something like bishop g7, rook e1, castles, and h3 restricting this bishop is perfectly fine for white's slight advantage. It's a totally different opening, but black can choose to enter the modern from the Ponziani. If you want to know more about this position, watch the series on the modern defense. And then finally, there is the aggressive d5 in conjunction with knight f6. Now, I believe this is suboptimal for black. The engine thinks so too. This should be slightly better for white. You can just go bishop b5. One of the most common patterns in the Ponziani, since this knight doesn't have any good squares, and we are opening up both diagonals, both for the queen and the bishop, and there's a knight looking at e5, there could be problems on c6. So after something like ed4, e5, knight e4, knight d4, you already have to deal with the pressure on c6. After something like bishop d7, bishop c6, bc6, I prefer white. This is very similar to some lines in the Scotch. In fact, it could in some cases transpose, and I think white should be better due to the superior pawn structure. So on d4, so the Jaenisch counterattack with knight f6, white plays d4. Most people with black are just going to play the best move. Knight takes pawn. I mean, you're up a pawn, so why wouldn't you do that? Now, what's the point of white's sacrifice? White isn't just giving up a pawn long term. You can see that e5 is hanging, is defended by the knight on c6. So since we have a pawn on d4, we now go d5. And here we have to look at 3 different ways for black to play. 2 of them are the main line with knight e7, the bad knight b8, this just, I don't think this is good, and the incredibly interesting and incredibly dangerous Vukovic gambit. Now Vukovic, I call him Croatian, he is a Croatian grandmaster. He's the guy who, you know, wrote a bunch of books and is one of the most famous players. He introduced the move bishop c5. Now, what's the point? You're seemingly giving up a knight. The point is that f2 is hanging, and bishop takes f2, similarly to what happens in the Traxler when white has a bishop on c4 and takes bishop takes f7. In this case, white's king is going to be in trouble. More importantly, this rook is going to be embarrassed. Now, the engine says black is slightly better with best play, but you really have to know your stuff. Let me show you what happens here. Firstly, you have to take that knight. There are no alternatives to taking the knight. If you play bishop e3, then you are losing. Bishop e3, f e3, and simply knight e7. This knight's going to be here forever. The pawn on d5 is weak. If you play something like c4, then d6, securing everything. f5 is coming. Black has a massive advantage. A massive advantage. This is winning according to the engine. So on bishop c5, we have to accept the gambit, the sacrifice. We take the knight. Okay, so what's the point? Bishop takes f2, king e2, only legal move. And now weak players are going to lose this position with bc6. This is a big mistake, and white's winning. We go queen a4, attacking the knight, attacking the bishop, and already black has to be extremely careful not to lose a piece. So f5, fine, the only way to sort of stay in the game. But we now go knight bd2. And we are attacking the knight, we want to misplace it. If the knight takes on d2, then it's absolutely game over. Bishop d2, this bishop needs to save itself. So let's say, I don't know, bishop c5, but now knight e5, and everything's collapsing. It's game over. Note that white can never castle due to this, and even though there's d6, c6 is hanging, and white is winning. Sorry, black can never castle, and white is winning. So on king e1, oh, excuse me. So on bishop c5, dc6, bishop f2, king e2, black needs to save the bishop straight away. Never mind about the pawn on c6, so bishop b6 is the move. And now, again, white needs to be extremely careful. Queen d5, only move. We need to put pressure on the knight. Knight f2 and our rook is going to be gone. However, in exchange, we win the bishop on c8, so we take, black takes, we take, the knight takes on h1. And now this is the point at which you can, start thinking by yourself. I wouldn't be happy being in this position as white. That being said, if you count the material, it is 2 minor pieces for a rook. And, white should technically have a material advantage, but it's really not simple. Most people make a mistake here and play bishop g5. That's in master games. In lichess games, people play bishop e3, which is also bad, and then they also play bishop g5, they play queen e4. By far the best move is a4, and the idea behind a4 is we want to go a5, and that introduces several options. Firstly, we have rook a4. Secondly, we have knight a3 without blocking in the pawn. The rook on a4 can come and join the attack on the king side. And it also threatens a5, misplacing the bishop from this optimal diagonal. And if black isn't careful, then we may just trap the knight. Now, black shouldn't overreact here. It's perfectly fine to play a5 or even c6. Those moves are perfectly fine, but black doesn't have to play them. Black should castle. And on a5, there is a way to get out of this mess. Queen e4 and simply bishop c5. And the bishop remains in place. Now, b4 is a bit too risky. The bishop has natural squares on d6 and d7 anyway. And I think the best move is knight g5, trying to attack. Now, if black isn't careful here, they could lose. g6 is losing, because on g6 we have g3, and the knight is lost. So if g6, g3, if knight f2, there is queen h4. Not the knight isn't lost, but it's trapped, and we have pressure on h7. So after something like h5, b4, now you move your bishop, I take your knight. The only move is queen f6, and then we win the bishop on c5, and it's game over. So on knight g5, there is only one way for black to stay equal, and that's rook takes b2. Now, we do not take that rook, because if we take that rook, the queen takes on g5, and white is the one who's busted. The only move is king e1. And this looks suicidal. This looks crazy to me. I wonder if Vukovic had done this much analysis before playing it for the first time. This is just crazy. So bishop f2 is losing for black, let's just say that, because of king d1, and your rook is hanging, your bishop is hanging, your knight is hanging after g3. So instead of that, black needs to play g6, because also h7 is hanging. And now we take bishop b2. And after queen g5, in this position, we actually have bishop a3 equalizing, and it should be equal. Let's call this the end of the line. So if you play the Ponziani, and they go knight e4, and you go d5, the only thing you have to know really well is the Vukovic gambit. And that's the only thing I would be afraid of as white. So please examine this very carefully and learn the most common tricks. Now let's look at the two more natural human moves, knight b8 and knight e7. As I said, knight e7 is the better move. Knight b8, according to the engine, is just as good, but I think it's a mistake from a human perspective. The idea is, of course, to play the typical Bogo Indian and King's Indian plan with d6, knight b8, knight d7, knight c5, and a5, and to plan that knight on c5. Now, if black succeeds in doing this, then that's a great plan, it's a great knight, but you aren't always going to have time to do that. So after knight b8, white takes on e5, queen e7. There are alternatives, but queen e7 is the best move. Queen d4 attacking the knight, knight of 6, bishop e3, white continues development, d6. Okay, now I like the move bishop b5 here. You don't have to play it, but if you don't go bishop b5 here, then black's going to go knight d7 and a5 and all that stuff is going to happen. So by playing bishop b5, we eliminate that option, knight bd7, and now we simply exchange. Takes, bishop takes, queen takes, and h3 covering the g4 square. White should have a slight advantage here. That being said, the structure is symmetrical and neither side should really have an advantage. I think c4 and knight c3 gives white excellent practical chances. If you turn on the engine, it says plus 0.2. And when it comes to the Ponziani, where black is usually slightly better, there's no doubt that playing knight b8 is suboptimal then. Okay, now the most common move, knight e7. This is what most people are going to play. Once again, we take the pawn on e5, black plays knight g6, we exchange, hg6, and queen e2. There are alternatives. You can go bishop d3 here. Again, you can find all the lines in the repertoire, but the main idea is behind bishop d3 to castle quickly and to go rook e1. I prefer to move queen e2 slightly because we are sort of embarrassing the knight. So black has to go queen e7. Now we go bishop e3, and after something like rook h5, we can go c4 with the idea of knight c3. There is only one very, very tempting move for black that could lead to some trouble. Queen e5. And knight c3, of course, is a bad move because queen c3 comes with check, so don't play knight c3. The engine says a3, which I'm going to be honest, I don't understand it. I don't know what the move does. The second best engine move is g4. Most people in this position have played f4 on master level. It has never been reached online, so maybe g4 is the way to go. And after something like bishop b4, king d1, and rook h4, bishop g2, we play this very messy position, but life goes on. The alternative a3, I'm just going to show you the engine line. The engine says a3 for white, rook h4 for black, f4, queen e7, and now knight c3. And I guess the reason we played a3 was to be able to play knight c3 after evicting the queen with f4, because now there is no queen b4. Because I guess on queen b4, a3, there's both knight c3 attacking the queen on e2, and perhaps there is queen a5, because on b4 there's knight c3 once again attacking the queen on e2. So that's my guess. If you don't want to deal with that position, you can go bishop d3, and after knight f6 you can simply castle. However, here you're dealing with a completely different type of issue. pressure on h2. Black, of course, can go bishop e7, d6, c5. I think bishop d6 is logical, but you do block your d-pawn. On bishop d6, rook e1, king f8, h3. The engine says white is slightly better, but I wouldn't be comfortable playing this position. Maybe there's knight h5, maybe there's queen h4, maybe knight f4 is coming, maybe b6, bishop b7 is coming, maybe c6 is coming. Seems slightly odd to me. So if you play bishop d3 and black doesn't play bishop e7, okay, so after knight f6 castles, black doesn't play bishop e7, then most likely black's king ends up on f8. And if they go bishop e7, then they are going to castle. Now, again, it's equal material. Neither side should be significantly better, but, you know, choose. Queen e2, more risky, bishop d3, less risky. So that's the main line. The main line is very complicated, and that's what you're going to be spending most of your time on. Now let's switch to the move d5. So after the Ponziani with c3, what if black doesn't play knight f6? What if black plays d5? Personally, I think that this is the best move for black, because it introduces the typical problems that you have to face when you make a slow move. There are a few moves here. Firstly, let's briefly mention the move d3. Now, if you're going to play the old Indian, play it with black, don't play it with white. This is just, it's a weird opening. You're going to go bishop e2, queen c2, and you know, all that stuff where you're playing for the e5 square. This is just passive, and it's not in the spirit of the Ponziani, so if you play c3, don't play d3 here. The two moves to exploit the move d5 are bishop b5 and queen a4. Most people play queen a4, although bishop b5, called the Spanish variation, is interesting. So now d4, of course, knight e5, that's the point behind bishop b5, and queen d5. We can still get away with this because we have queen a4. So if you learn a few of these tactical patterns, you can make positions like these playable. So of course, if queen e5, then we take on c6 twice with the rook in the corner. But the most promising move, I think, is queen a4 straight away. Now, there are two ways to continue this position for black. Most commonly, people play f6, because once again, the knight is pinned, and we're threatening to take on e5. But you can also unpin the knight and defend very directly with bishop d7. However, that leads to complications. So if you go queen a4, be aware of the move bishop d7. So we, in this position, can take on d5. The bishop has blocked the queen from defending d5, so we take. But there's a discovery, knight d4. And not only is that attacking the queen, it's also attacking the c2 square, so maybe we're going to lose the rook, so we basically only have one move. Queen d1. And now black exchanges, we take back, they go knight f6. And even though we're up a pawn for a moment, e4 is coming, and it's not going to be as simple. I still like the move bishop c4, and on e4, queen e2. But after bishop d6, despite having an extra pawn, we are going to have to deal with a lot of attacking pressure on the king side. Even a simple great gift sacrifice almost works. White's best is d4. We want to, you know, challenge the center. If this is taken, there is no trouble at all. So black castles. And in this position, you have to be careful. If you castle here, then knight g4 is coming. Maybe bishop h2 doesn't work straight away, but knight g4 is incredibly dangerous. h3 you are already losing because of knight h2. And if you, I don't know, move your rook, let's say you play rook e1, then there's queen h4. And everything's collapsing. This is a very scary attack, and it's a very atypical pattern, but you know, you're not surviving this. So don't castle. When black castles, I think the best move is bishop g5, just getting rid of as much pressure as you can. So h6, bishop h4. Now we are controlling the dark squares. We can safely tuck the bishop away on g3. And from here, black can do many different things. The engine surprisingly says b5 is the best move, wants to take the d5 pawn, but there are other options. Of course, you can always throw in bishop takes f6 to make b5 a bad move. I don't know. The second best move according to the engine, rook e8, then there's g5. It's basically equal, white's up a pawn, but I feel very safe being up a pawn since, you know, this bishop is coming to g3 and is going to cover the dark squares. So on queen a4, bishop d7, hanging the pawn on d5 is one of the more promising variations for black, although, as I said, after bishop g5, I wouldn't be scared. The most common way to defend is f6. Now, we have a couple of options, bishop b5 or d3, simply continuing the development. Bishop b5 is okay, and black can easily go wrong. So after e d5, queen d5, d4, e4, c4, queen d6, c5, this is all pretty much forced. Black can easily lose this position here. They need to go queen d7 or queen d8. If they go queen d5, then we gain another tempo with knight c3, and after queen f7, we pick up the pawn on e4, and we're winning. So bishop b5 could lead to some quick mistakes by black, but I prefer the calmer d3 and just, you know, continuing the development, because f6 is a weakness, and black's king isn't really going to be comfortable anywhere on the board, and this bishop isn't going to be as active because of the move e6, f6. So like bishop e6, bishop e2, bishop d6, knight b d2, let's say knight e7, d4, fine, castles, I don't know, d5, maybe knight e5, knight e5, bishop e5, castles. It just seems like a normal position, but, you know, black has this pawn on f6. I mean, many things could have happened from here. So I don't think d5 is scary for white, but I still think it's the principled way for black to play. Okay, now let's have a look at the two rare alternatives. What if black just plays d6? Okay, so first of all, when they go d6, we are almost inevitably going to transpose to the Steinitz in the Roy Lopez in the Spanish. So we go d4, black goes bishop e7, and we go bishop b5. Now we are in the Steinitz, and there are tons of games from here. You should study Spanish theory if you want to become very good at this opening, but basically we are going to go d5 at some point, and black's going to go knight b8, knight d7, knight c5, and a5. And we're going to play something very similar to the King's Indian, or the Old Indian. It would be a King's Indian if this bishop was on g7. Now it's going to be an Old Indian. But the patterns that are important are d5 and knight b8. This exchange happens, c4, knight c5, knight c3, a5. This is the important position. And if with the bishop on g7, I've had this position a million times. In the Old Indian, I've never had it. You can get it easily from the Steinitz. So this is what I keep talking about. The Indian and the Spanish structure are often very similar, depending on whether the pawn is on g6 or the bishop is on e7. It's going to either be an Old Indian or a King's Indian. But in this case, I would still like to play b3 at some point. I like to play b3 in these positions to prevent a4. The main idea is if you go a3 to prepare b4 to dislodge the knight, then you give away the b3 square. If you play b4 straight away, you lose the pawn. And if you play a3, most importantly, white can go a4, gaining firm control over b3. Excuse me, black can go a4 and destroying your queen side. So a sensible way to approach a position like this from a positional standpoint is to play b3. And then a4 is met with b4, and you can slowly prepare a3 and b4 and dislodge that knight. But, you know, that's a story for another time. This isn't even the Ponziani. I just wanted you to know a few strategic concepts here. And finally, let's have a look at the Ponziani Countergambit. So the guy who the opening got named after, Ponziani, full name Domenico Lorenzo Ponziani, he introduced the opening in not the 19th century, the 18th century. That's the move f5. And once again, black is using the downside of white's last move. The e4 pawn isn't defended. There's no easy way to defend it. So, f5. Now I should say that the engine thinks taking on f5 is the best move. I should also say that no one plays that. People don't take on f5, and you shouldn't either. The engine's idea is that after queen f6, you go d4, and on e4, you go knight fd2. I don't know. The engine says f3, we're gonna, dislodge this pawn, destroy the center. Black's gonna go e3, but then, we can safely move the knight away to b3 and still win the pawn back. So after something like queen f5, bishop e2, d5, let's say, immediately f3. And I don't know, knight f6 castles, e3, knight b3. White should have a significant advantage here because it's not going to be easy to defend the pawn. And, once you pick up the pawn, the e-file is ours and we can continue development. That being said, no one plays this. If you want to play it, learn a few engine lines. You can find them, again, in the repertoire below. And it's the best move. What people do play is d4. It's a principled move and it's in line with the Ponziani. So, okay, d4, black played f5, so they are going to take on e4, and we have to take on e5. Now I should say that knight e5 is a mistake. Black should not exchange this knight. Black has a couple of options here, either knight f6 or queen f6, putting more pressure on the knight with the queen, or knight f6 defending the pawn on e4 and developing. If you take the knight, then d5 and let's say d5, because that's, if you aren't going to go d5, what do you do? How do you develop? d5 or d6. We take bishop d6, and now there's queen a4, and we know this pattern. We take on e4. White is better. It's not a winning advantage, but we're up a pawn, and a good player would win. So let's stick to the two good moves, queen f6 and knight f6. Queen f6 first, because it's a weird move. Now, this has been played about 20 times, and you can play queen h5, you can play queen c2, you can, take on c6, but I think the best move is knight g4. And this introduces a few problems black has to solve. Firstly, where does the queen go? Most people move the queen to g6. Alternatives, I don't know, f7 is playable, maybe. But if you move the queen to f7, then d5 is coming. So queen g6. Queen f5 should be losing due to knight e3. White's idea, I should say, is not to win the queen. It's to transfer the knight to e3 and play d5 in most cases. So queen g6, bishop f4, we continue development. We want to go bishop f4 before we play knight e3. And when we play knight e3, this bishop can safely move out without losing the g-pawn, and the d-pawn will be overprotected. So in this position, black really should go d5. If they don't, and white plays d5, that's going to be a disaster. And now knight e3, attacking the pawn on d5. And I don't know, probably queen f7, followed by either g3 or moving the bishop out. G3 because the bishop's hanging. I really enjoy this position for white. I don't think black has nearly enough here to justify the weakness on d5, and the fact that the queen has moved a million times and that the pieces are still on the back rank. That being said, queen f6 is a playable move. I think the best move is knight f6. And now there are a couple of ways to play. The engine actually hates knight f6. But the engine hates f5 in the first place. You shouldn't play the Ponziani Countergambit. The engine plays the move bishop b5 here. And almost no one plays that in tournament games. People play bishop to g5, pinning the knight. After bishop g5, d6, knight c6, bc6, this is what most grandmasters play. d5, f3, once again undermining the pawn, and continuing with bishop e2 castles, and so on. And this is fine. White's, slightly better. But if you go bishop b5, this is actually very hard to deal with. Firstly, what do? If you take this knight, then that's just losing, because very similar to the Vienna Gambit, the knight has no squares. It has to go to g8. That's just dreadful. And now bishop f4, and you're in trouble. You're never developing. Everything is hanging. The e4 pawn is going to fall. and your king's never going to castle. So that's just a blunder. So on bishop b5, what else do we do? If you play d6, you lose the pawn on c6, you lose the knight on c6, you lose a pawn and the rook, so that's not playable. If we play bishop d6, this is a relatively normal move. Now white has the move knight g4. And how do you deal with this? a6, bishop h4. What now? If you castle, white castles. Knight g4, queen g4. Look at the queen. Look at this bishop being stuck. The bishop's coming to b3. The other bishop's coming to h6. The knight's going to come to e4. We may even consider playing f3. So the engine gives this as winning for white. The only move other than bishop e7 is queen e7. And this is supposed to be the best move. But it's still, I don't think it works. We can go bishop f4. And once again, if black takes, then d5, and you know that the knight's going to have to move. And white's winning, so you're not taking on e5. Now the engine says the best move is queen e6. I don't know. If you go d6, once again you lose on c6. If you go g6, you're creating a ton of weaknesses. Just knight d2, bishop g7, castles, castles. This king feels very, very unsafe. White is better. So in short, I don't think you should play f5 in the first place. And after d4, fe4, knight e5, I think you should play knight f6 because it's the best of three bad options. Queen f6 leads to complicated, better positions for white as well. So against the Ponziani, let's do a short recap. Black has four options: knight f6, d5, d6, and f5. I'm going to show you a few minor sidelines in just a minute. And let's say that knight f6 and d5 are the good moves. d6 is a passive move where white just has a slight advantage in an equal position, and f5 is too risky and simply bad. So stick to knight f6 or d5. Now a few minor sidelines. Bishop e7 is the Romanician variation. It's going to be very similar to the old Indian for both sides. I don't even know how to call that. So after d4, after d4, knight f6, white can play d5, the knight goes to b8, and black is going to go, d6 and their standard stuff. So bishop d3, and the knight's going to come out to d7. I think this is the old Indian. Once again, white has a slight advantage. g6, again, should transpose to a sort of modern defense after d4, bishop g7. However, white has the option to play the very annoying bishop g5 here. And whether black plays f6 or knight f6 or bishop f6, black's in trouble. First of all, knight f6 loses due to de. Bishop f6 is the best move according to the engine, but now we have h4, and it's not going to be a normal modern defense. So I don't think this is playable. The Reti variation, knight g7, I don't know. It's just bad. It just doesn't make any sense. I like the move bishop c4 here, but you can also play d4. So d4 keeping in line with the Ponziani, e4, cd4, d5, e5. Black's idea is to destroy the center and put pressure on d4 with knight f5 and bishop g4, and that's fine, but in compensation, white's going to get a ton of activity, so something like bishop g4, bishop e2, knight f5, knight bd2. Now in order to win the d4 pawn, you need to play bishop b4. White castles, black gives up the bishop pair, gives up both bishops, takes knight cd4, and white has a slight advantage with something like bishop g4. Your king isn't safe yet. Your knights are relatively unstable in the center. You're up a pawn, but I'm not sure many people would take black here. So that's the Ponziani. If you want something offbeat, something people aren't going to expect, it's definitely worth playing. On our level, meaning, either online players or tournament players below, let's say, a FIDE title, it really doesn't matter whether the evaluation is plus 0.2 or minus 0.2. It makes no difference. The side that wins is usually the side that understands the position better. So if you like the Ponziani, play the Ponziani. Thank you for watching. Once again, there's the repertoire in the comments and in the description below. Visit Chessbook, learn the Ponziani, and enjoy yourselves. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.